What happens when a calm daytime talk show suddenly turns into a battlefield, and one of Hollywood's most unpredictable stars decides he's done staying polite? Before we step into this moment, take 1 second right now. Hit subscribe to Stage View, like the video, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because what unfolded on that stage, nobody in the studio or online was prepared for it. The lights in the studio were warm. Too warm. That familiar glow that daytime television loves so much bathed the curved desk and the bright backdrop of the set. The audience clapped rhythmically, the kind of applause trained by warm-up comedians before the cameras roll. Sunny Hostin sat upright in her chair, composed, polished, the practiced calm of someone who had navigated countless heated conversations on live television. To her right, the other hosts exchanged casual smiles, shuffling note cards and sipping from the iconic mugs. But the energy that morning felt different. Because today's guest wasn't just another actor promoting a movie. It was Ben Affleck. And when Ben Affleck walked out onto the stage, something in the room shifted. The applause erupted instantly. Louder than usual. A mixture of admiration and curiosity. Affleck waved politely, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Anyone watching closely could see it. The subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he exhaled deeply before sitting down. He looked tired, not physically exhausted, emotionally tired. Sunny leaned forward with a welcoming grin. Ben, thank you for being here. It's great to have you. Affleck nodded. Thanks for having me. His voice was calm, measured. The interview started like they always do. Light. Safe. Sunny asked about his new project. A film he had both directed and starred in. Affleck spoke thoughtfully about storytelling, about the challenges of directing while acting. The audience laughed when he joked about forgetting his own lines during a complicated scene. Everything felt normal. But then Sunny shifted slightly in her chair. And the tone changed. You've been in the public eye for decades, she said carefully. But lately there's been a lot of conversation about you in the media. Affleck tilted his head. Yeah, he replied with a small, knowing smile. Sunny continued. Some people feel you've been misunderstood. Others say the criticism is fair. And I'm curious. How do you respond to the idea that celebrities sometimes bring that scrutiny on themselves? A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. Affleck leaned back slightly, his fingers interlocked. He looked at Sunny for a moment longer than expected. The pause stretched. For a second, it seemed like he might brush the question aside, give the polished, media-trained answer. But instead, he sighed. You know what's interesting about that question? He said slowly. Sunny's smile held, but her eyebrows lifted just slightly. What's that? Affleck leaned forward now. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge underneath. The way it's asked. The room went quieter. He continued. Because it assumes something. It assumes that the narrative out there is automatically true. One of the co-hosts shifted in her chair. Sunny remained composed. Well, she replied smoothly, the media reflects what people see. Affleck chuckled, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Does it? The audience felt the shift instantly. You could almost hear people leaning forward. Sunny kept her tone measured. Are you saying the media misrepresents you? Affleck didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out toward the audience. Rows of faces staring back. Then he turned back to the hosts. I'm saying, he began, that sometimes a story becomes convenient. The studio lights reflected in his eyes. And once it's convenient, people stop asking if it's accurate. Sunny folded her hands on the table. And are you saying that's happened to you? Affleck nodded slightly. I think anyone who's been in the spotlight long enough knows how quickly things get simplified. Sunny leaned closer. But isn't that part of the responsibility of fame? The tension was now unmistakable. Affleck's jaw tightened just a bit. Responsibility? Yes, Sunny replied. Public figures influence culture. People watch what you do. Affleck smiled faintly. I agree with that. Then shouldn't celebrities accept criticism when it comes? Another pause. But this time the silence felt heavier. Affleck looked down briefly. Then back up. Criticism isn't the problem, he said. It's the assumption. Sunny tilted her head. What assumption? Affleck's voice lowered slightly. That the headlines always tell the truth. A few audience members clapped softly. The hosts glanced at each other. Sunny nodded slowly. Well, sometimes they don't, she admitted. But sometimes they do. Affleck smiled again, but the smile now had a sharpness to it. Sure, he said. And sometimes they're built on 5-second clips, half quotes, and speculation. The room was completely silent now. Sunny didn't back down. So are you saying journalists are unfair? Affleck shook his head. No, I'm saying the system rewards outrage. That line landed like a stone in water. Ripples of reaction moved through the audience. Sunny raised an eyebrow. You're sitting on a talk show that discusses culture and media every day, she said. Affleck nodded. I know. And you're suggesting that conversation is part of the problem? Affleck leaned forward again. Now his tone was more intense. I'm suggesting, he said slowly, that sometimes people forget there are real human beings on the other side of those stories. The camera cut briefly to the audience. Some nodded. Others looked uneasy. Sunny remained poised. But public figures choose that spotlight, she said. Affleck exhaled through his nose. Do they choose every headline? The tension had reached a point where even the other hosts seemed unsure whether to jump in. Sunny's voice softened slightly. No, she admitted. But they choose their actions. Affleck nodded once. Fair. He paused. Then added quietly. But they don't choose the narrative built around those actions. The studio was completely still. And then Sunny asked the question that changed everything. So are you saying, she said carefully, that the public, and shows like this one, have judged you unfairly? The audience held its breath. Affleck looked directly at her. For the first time since the interview began, the polite Hollywood mask seemed to slip. Just a little. His voice dropped lower. I'm saying, he replied, that sometimes people talk about you without ever actually talking to you. The air in the room felt electric. Sunny didn't blink. Well, she said evenly, you're here now. Affleck nodded slowly. Yeah, another pause. And I appreciate that. Sunny leaned back slightly. Then let's talk. The audience clapped nervously. But something about Affleck's expression suggested the real conversation had only just begun. The applause faded quickly. Not the confident, cheerful applause that usually fills the studio. This was different. Uneasy. Like the audience wasn't quite sure whether they had just witnessed the start of a great conversation or the beginning of something far more uncomfortable. Ben Affleck sat back in his chair, fingers loosely wrapped around the coffee mug in front of him. His eyes moved briefly across the studio audience before returning to the table. Sunny Hostin watched him closely. Years of legal training had given her a talent for reading people. Micro-expressions, tone shifts, small hesitations. And what she saw in that moment wasn't anger. It was something more complicated. Frustration. The cameras quietly shifted positions. A red light blinked above one lens. They were still rolling. Sunny gave a measured smile. Well, Ben, she said, folding her hands neatly on the table. You're right. You are here now. And I think people would genuinely like to hear your side. Affleck nodded slowly. I'm happy to talk, he replied. One of the co-hosts tried to lighten the moment. You know, she laughed gently, we promised our audience some behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories today. Not a philosophy debate about media narratives. A ripple of laughter spread across the audience. Affleck chuckled. Trust me, he said. I'd prefer talking about movies too. For a moment, the tension eased. But Sunny leaned forward again. Let's start here, she said calmly. You've spoken before about how difficult public scrutiny can be. But critics would say fame also gives celebrities enormous influence and privilege. Affleck listened carefully. Sunny continued. So when people question your behavior or decisions, why does that feel unfair? Affleck took a breath. You know, he began, I don't think questioning public figures is unfair. Honestly, I think it's necessary. Sunny nodded approvingly. But, he continued, there's a difference between questioning someone and deciding who they are. The audience murmured quietly. Sunny tilted her head slightly. What do you mean by that? Affleck leaned forward again, elbows resting lightly on the desk. Let me give you an example, he said. The room grew quiet. You have a bad day. Everyone does. Maybe you say something wrong. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you handle a situation badly. Sunny nodded. That's human. Exactly, Affleck replied. He lifted his hand slightly. But imagine that moment becomes a headline. Then another headline. Then another. He paused. And suddenly that moment becomes your identity. The audience listened intently. Sunny remained composed. But that's not unique to celebrities, she said. Affleck nodded. No, but the scale is. He gestured toward the cameras. When you're a public figure, the story travels faster than the truth ever can. One of the co-hosts interjected carefully. But some people would argue, Those stories exist because there's a pattern. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the audience. Affleck looked at her. Not angrily, but directly. You mean the narrative, he said. The co-host hesitated slightly. Well, yes. Sunny watched the exchange carefully. Let's be honest, she said, stepping back into the conversation. People feel they've seen different sides of you over the years. Affleck nodded. That's probably true. Sunny continued. Sometimes charming. Sometimes defensive. Sometimes withdrawn. Another ripple moved through the crowd. Affleck smiled faintly. That sounds like most people. A few audience members laughed. Sunny smiled too. Fair enough. But she didn't let go. Yet when the public reacts to those moments, you've suggested the reaction can be unfair. Affleck paused. For a moment, he stared at the surface of the desk. Then he spoke again. You know what's interesting? He said. Sunny waited. People talk about accountability all the time. That's important, Sunny said firmly. I agree, Affleck replied. Then he looked up. But accountability goes both ways. The room went still. Sunny's expression sharpened slightly. What do you mean? Affleck's voice remained steady. I mean, media platforms also have influence. Massive influence. He glanced briefly around the set. Shows like this. Panels. Commentary segments. Clips that spread online within minutes. Sunny understood where this was going. And you think those platforms misuse that influence? Affleck didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question of his own. Can I ask you something, Sunny? The audience leaned forward. She nodded. Of course. Affleck rested his hands on the table. When you discuss celebrities on this show, do you ever worry about the impact it has on the person being discussed? The studio grew very quiet. Sunny didn't look offended, but her eyes narrowed slightly in concentration. We're having cultural conversations, she replied. And sometimes those conversations involve public figures. Affleck nodded. I understand that. Sunny continued. But the responsibility of journalism and commentary is to examine behavior. Affleck tilted his head. And who examines the commentary? A few audience members clapped before quickly stopping. Sunny noticed. Her smile tightened slightly. Well, she said, the public does. Affleck gave a small laugh. That's optimistic. One of the other hosts tried to ease the tension again. Ben, she said playfully, are you suggesting we're part of some giant Hollywood conspiracy? The audience laughed. Affleck smiled politely. No. Then he added quietly. I'm suggesting sometimes conversations about people happen without context. Sunny crossed her legs beneath the table. Context matters, she agreed. But accountability matters too. Affleck nodded again. You're right. Another pause. Then Sunny asked a sharper question. So let me ask you directly. The room seemed to hold its breath. When people criticize you for past controversies, do you think they're wrong? Affleck's expression changed slightly. Not anger. Something heavier. He leaned back slowly. That's a big question, he said. Sunny didn't respond. She simply waited. Affleck rubbed his hands together thoughtfully. You know, he said, I've made mistakes. The honesty surprised some people in the audience. He continued. Plenty of them. Sunny nodded. We all do. But the difference, Affleck said, is that most people's mistakes don't become permanent internet artifacts. Sunny replied calmly. That's the reality of public life. Affleck looked at her. Yes, he said. But reality doesn't mean fairness. The words hung in the air. For the first time, one of the co-hosts looked slightly uncomfortable. Sunny tapped her finger lightly against the table. Do you feel judged? She asked. Affleck didn't hesitate. Sometimes. By who? He looked around the table. By people who only know the headline version of me. Sunny leaned closer again. And you think this show contributes to that? The audience murmured. This question felt different. Sharper. More direct. Affleck's eyes locked with hers. I think conversations like this can either humanize people or reduce them. Sunny's voice stayed calm. And which do you think we're doing right now? Affleck smiled slightly. I guess that depends on what happens next. A few people in the audience laughed nervously. Sunny wasn't laughing. Instead, she asked the question that made several producers behind the cameras suddenly sit up straight. Then let's talk about specifics. Affleck raised an eyebrow. Okay. Sunny glanced down briefly at her notes. Then back up. There have been moments where critics say your reactions to the media seemed hostile. The audience shifted in their seats. Affleck remained still. Sunny continued. Some viewers interpret that as defensiveness. She paused. Why do you think that perception exists? Affleck exhaled slowly. Then he leaned forward once more. Because, he said quietly, sometimes when people feel misunderstood, they push back. Sunny nodded. That's understandable. But when that pushback becomes public, she added, people see it too. Affleck's eyes narrowed just slightly. And sometimes they see only that moment. Sunny responded immediately. But the moment still happened. Another wave of murmurs. The tension was rising again. Affleck's voice grew firmer. Yes, but moments without context are powerful weapons. Sunny didn't back away. Are you saying criticism of you is a weapon? Affleck looked directly at her. I'm saying narratives can become weapons. The silence was thick. Then Sunny asked the question that would soon send the entire conversation in a direction no one in the studio expected. So if narratives are weapons, she leaned forward slowly. Who do you think is holding them? The audience froze. The hosts looked toward Affleck. And for the first time since he had walked onto the stage, Ben Affleck didn't answer right away. The silence after Sunny's question felt longer than it really was. Just a few seconds. But in a live television studio, a few seconds can feel like an eternity. So if narratives are weapons, who do you think is holding them? Every camera in the room pointed toward Ben Affleck. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and slowly folded his hands together. His expression wasn't angry, but the calm composure he had held earlier had shifted. There was something heavier behind his eyes now. Thoughtful, measured, dangerously honest. The audience waited. Sunny Hostin didn't interrupt the silence. She simply watched him, patient, the way a skilled interviewer waits for the truth to surface. Finally, Affleck spoke. Honestly, Sunny nodded. Honestly. He glanced around the table, then toward the audience, then back at her. I think everyone holds them, he said quietly. The answer seemed to catch some people off guard. Sunny tilted her head slightly. Everyone. Affleck nodded. Media outlets. Social media. Audiences. Commentators. Even celebrities themselves. A few murmurs spread through the crowd. Sunny leaned forward. That sounds like you're spreading responsibility very widely. Affleck shrugged slightly. Well, reality is complicated. The audience chuckled lightly. But Sunny wasn't finished. Yet earlier you suggested platforms like this one have enormous influence. That's true, Affleck replied. And with influence comes responsibility, she said. Affleck nodded again. Absolutely. Sunny's voice sharpened slightly. So if a show like this questions a public figure's actions, that's part of responsible conversation, isn't it? Affleck paused. Yes, he admitted. But questioning someone and defining them are two different things. The audience murmured again. Sunny crossed one leg over the other. And you feel defined? Affleck smiled faintly. Sometimes. One of the co-hosts jumped in cautiously. But Ben, people also remember the positive things about you. Your films, your charity work, your career. Affleck nodded appreciatively. That's true too. The co-host continued. So isn't the public perception a mix? Affleck looked thoughtful. Maybe. Sunny tapped her pen lightly against the desk. But when viewers watch interviews where you seem irritated or frustrated with reporters. She paused. They're reacting to what they see. Affleck's gaze sharpened. Are they? Sunny held his gaze. Yes. Affleck leaned forward again. Or are they reacting to what they're told they're seeing? A ripple of tension passed through the room. Sunny didn't blink. That sounds like you're accusing the media of manipulation. Affleck shook his head. No. I'm saying framing matters. The audience nodded in scattered agreement. Sunny replied calmly. Framing is part of storytelling. Affleck smiled. I know. I'm a filmmaker. A few laughs broke the tension. But Sunny quickly continued. And storytelling can reveal truth. Affleck tilted his head. Or shape it. The words hung in the air. Behind the cameras, a producer whispered urgently into a headset. The discussion had drifted far away from the safe, promotional interview they had planned. Sunny seemed aware of that, but she didn't change course. Instead, she asked another question. Let me ask you something more personal. Affleck nodded. Okay. Sunny studied him carefully. Do you think you've ever misunderstood the media? Affleck blinked once. That question seemed to genuinely surprise him. He thought about it. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. The honesty startled the audience. Sunny raised an eyebrow. You do? Of course, Affleck replied. I've had moments where I reacted emotionally, where I felt attacked. He shrugged lightly. And maybe sometimes I read too much into things. Sunny gave a small, satisfied nod. That's a fair reflection. But, Affleck added quickly, that doesn't mean the system itself is always fair. Sunny's expression hardened slightly. Life isn't always fair. Affleck smiled thinly. True. Another host spoke up carefully. But Ben, if someone criticizes you on a show like this, they're usually responding to public events. Affleck nodded. I understand that. The co-host continued. So what would you want to change? That question shifted the atmosphere again. Affleck leaned back and thought about it. For several seconds, he didn't speak. The studio waited. Then he said something that made the room noticeably quieter. I think we've forgotten how to see people as complicated. Sunny tilted her head. Explain that. Affleck gestured gently with one hand. We've created a culture where people are either heroes or villains. The audience murmured in agreement. He continued. One bad moment, and suddenly someone becomes the villain of the week. Sunny responded. But accountability matters. Yes, Affleck said firmly. I'm not arguing against accountability. He leaned forward again. I'm arguing against simplification. Sunny narrowed her eyes slightly. You're suggesting public discussion oversimplifies people. Affleck nodded. Constantly. Sunny responded quickly. But television conversations are limited by time. We can't explore every detail. Affleck gave a small smile. I get that. He looked around the set again. But sometimes those quick conversations become viral clips. The audience reacted with knowing murmurs. Affleck continued. And those clips become the story. Sunny folded her hands. That's the reality of modern media. Affleck nodded. Yes. He paused. But reality is something we build together. The line landed heavily. For the first time, Sunny seemed slightly defensive. Ben, are you suggesting we're responsible for negative public perceptions about you? The room tensed instantly. Affleck held up a hand slightly. No. Then he added carefully. I'm saying conversations have consequences. Sunny leaned forward. So do actions. Their eyes locked. The tension between them had become undeniable. Not hostile, but intense. Two intelligent people refusing to retreat. The audience could feel it. One of the co-hosts tried again to diffuse things. Well, this has certainly turned into one of the deeper interviews we've had. The audience laughed nervously. Affleck smiled politely. Sunny didn't laugh. Instead, she asked another question. Let me put it another way. Affleck waited. Do you think celebrities deserve more sympathy? The audience reacted with surprised murmurs. Affleck shook his head. No. Sunny looked almost amused. You don't? No. He leaned forward again. I think everyone deserves context. That answer drew applause. Sunny noticed. Her voice became more deliberate. But context doesn't erase responsibility. Affleck nodded again. Correct. Sunny pressed further. So when viewers criticize something you've done, you accept that? Affleck hesitated. Then he answered honestly. Sometimes. Sunny immediately asked. And sometimes you don't. Affleck looked directly at her. Yes. The air grew tense again. Sunny's next words came slowly. Because you believe the narrative is wrong. Affleck's voice dropped slightly. Because sometimes it is. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the audience. Sunny's expression sharpened. Or because it's uncomfortable? The room froze. The question hit like a spark. Affleck stared at her. Not angry, but clearly surprised by the implication. For the first time all interview, his voice carried a hint of frustration. Do you think I can't handle criticism? Sunny held his gaze. I think everyone struggles with criticism. Affleck leaned forward. But you're implying something more than that. Sunny responded calmly. I'm asking. Affleck let out a breath. Then he said something that instantly shifted the atmosphere. Can I ask you a question now? Sunny nodded. Go ahead. Affleck looked at her carefully. You've talked about accountability for public figures. Yes. You've talked about responsibility. Yes. Affleck paused. Then he asked quietly, do you think commentators ever reflect on their own influence the same way? The question landed hard. The audience murmured loudly. Sunny blinked. For the first time during the interview, she didn't answer immediately. One of the co-hosts looked between them nervously. Producers behind the cameras exchanged worried glances. Because what had started as a typical celebrity interview had now turned into something much bigger. A conversation about power, influence, and who really controls the narrative. Sunny finally leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp. "Well," she said slowly, "that's an interesting question." The room waited, and everyone could feel it. The conversation was about to reach its breaking point. Sunny's words hung in the air like the quiet moment before thunder. "Well, that's an interesting question." The studio was so still that the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed louder than usual. Every person in the audience could feel it. The atmosphere had changed from an interview to something closer to a confrontation neither side had originally planned. Ben Affleck didn't look away. Sunny Hostin didn't either. For a few seconds, they simply studied each other across the table. Two people used to public conversations. Two people used to defending their positions. But this moment felt more personal. Sunny leaned forward slightly, resting one hand on the desk. "You're asking whether commentators reflect on their influence the same way celebrities are expected to reflect on theirs." Affleck nodded. "Yes." Sunny inhaled slowly before answering. "I think responsible commentators do," she said. Affleck tilted his head just slightly. "But not all of them?" Sunny smiled carefully. "Just like not all celebrities behave responsibly." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Affleck chuckled. "Fair point." For a brief second the tension eased again. But the conversation was too deep now to return to safe ground. Sunny continued. "You're clearly frustrated with the way narratives form around public figures." Affleck nodded. "That's true." She tapped her pen lightly against the desk again. "But you're also sitting here on a platform where millions of people are watching you right now." Affleck glanced toward the cameras. "And I appreciate that." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Then what would you want those viewers to understand about you that they don't already?" That question changed the tone. Affleck paused longer this time. He looked out toward the audience. Then back to Sunny. His voice softened slightly. "I guess I'd want people to remember that the version of someone they see in headlines isn't the whole person." The audience nodded quietly. Sunny listened without interrupting. Affleck continued. "I've made mistakes. Everyone knows that." He shrugged. "I'm not pretending otherwise." Sunny nodded. "But mistakes don't define someone forever." The room grew quiet again. One of the co-hosts spoke gently. "That's something a lot of people can relate to." Affleck gave her a grateful smile. Sunny folded her hands again. "But public figures also become symbols for certain behaviors." Affleck nodded. "I understand that." She leaned forward. "And sometimes people react strongly because they feel those behaviors matter culturally." Affleck considered that. "Sure." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "But that reaction can also become amplified." Sunny tilted her head. "Amplified by who?" Affleck smiled faintly. "You know the answer to that." A few audience members laughed quietly. Sunny didn't laugh this time. Instead, she said something that surprised many people watching. "You know, when we prepared for this interview, we expected a conversation about your new film." Affleck smiled. "Yeah, me too." The audience laughed. "But sometimes," Sunny continued, "the most interesting conversations are the ones that weren't planned." Affleck nodded slowly. "That's true." She studied him again. "You've been very open today." He shrugged. "I try." Sunny paused. Then she asked one final question. "And after everything you've experienced in the public eye, do you still believe the media can be fair?" The audience leaned forward again. This felt like the closing note of the debate. Affleck took a breath. He thought carefully before answering. "Yes," he said. Sunny looked surprised. "You do?" Affleck nodded. "I do." He gestured lightly toward the table. "Because conversations like this are possible." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Even when they get uncomfortable?" Affleck smiled. "Especially then." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the audience started clapping. At first it was scattered. Then louder. Not the usual polite applause. This sounded more like appreciation for a real conversation. The tension that had filled the room slowly dissolved into something closer to respect. Sunny gave a small nod. "Well," she said, smiling now, "that may have been one of the most honest discussions we've had on this show." Affleck laughed. "I hope I didn't get anyone in trouble." The co-hosts laughed. "Oh, it's live television," one of them joked. "We're always in trouble." The audience erupted with laughter. The cameras began to pull back slightly. The producers were signaling that the segment was wrapping up. Sunny turned toward Affleck again. "Ben, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me." The applause continued as the segment ended. But the story didn't end there. Because within minutes of the broadcast finishing, the internet did what the internet always does. It exploded. Clips of the exchange started appearing on social media almost immediately. One clip showed Affleck saying, "Narratives can become weapons." Another showed Sunny asking, "Who do you think is holding them?" The comments poured in by the thousands. Some viewers praised the discussion. This was one of the most intelligent conversations I've seen on daytime TV. Others took sides. Ben Affleck just called out the media live on air. Another comment read, "Sunny held her ground. That's how interviews should be." News outlets quickly picked up the story. Entertainment blogs posted headlines like, "Unexpected clash on daytime TV. Ben Affleck and Sunny Hostin's heated debate goes viral." Within hours, the clip had millions of views. People debated every moment. Who had the stronger argument? Who looked more composed? Who made the better point? Even media analysts weighed in. Some praised the show for allowing a real conversation instead of cutting it short. Others argued it showed the growing tension between celebrities and media commentary. Meanwhile, inside the studio, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The hosts chatted quietly as the crew began preparing for the next segment. Sunny leaned toward Affleck with a relaxed smile. "That was interesting." Affleck laughed. "That's one word for it." "You handled yourself well," she said. "So did you," he replied. They shook hands. Whatever tension had existed during the conversation seemed to fade the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Because in reality, debates like this aren't personal. They're part of a much larger conversation happening everywhere. About media, about public figures, about how stories get told, and who gets to tell them. But now we want to hear from you. Did Ben Affleck make a good point about media narratives? Or do you think Sunny Hostin was right to challenge him? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoy dramatic celebrity moments and deep behind-the-scenes stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to Stage View so you never miss the next explosive conversation. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments on television are the ones nobody planned.